The knocking started just after sunrise. 3 slow knocks. Then 2 more. I stood in the kitchen, holding a mug I hadn't even tasted yet. The apartment was quiet except for the refrigerator humming behind me and the soft rain tapping the window. Whoever was outside didn't knock like a delivery driver. They knocked like they already belonged there. I looked through the peephole. And froze. A suitcase. My mother's coat. My father staring at his phone like he was annoyed to be waiting. They were supposed to be hundreds of miles away. They were supposed to have no reason to know where I lived. My hand stayed on the lock, but I didn't open it. I just stood there, listening to them breathe on the other side of my door. That's when I realized something was very wrong. A few months earlier, I'd had no door to lock. When my parents kicked me out, they did it carefully. Not loud. Not theatrical. That would have been easier, honestly. Instead, my father called it a reset. My mother said I was too old to still be leaning on family. They said it like they were giving me advice, not erasing me from their lives. By the end of that week, my room was cleared, my things were boxed, and the spare key I had always used no longer worked. I left with 2 bags, an old laptop, and just enough money for a cheap motel and a few groceries. What made it worse was how normal they acted after. My mother texted me recipes 2 days later, like nothing had happened. My father sent a short message reminding me to update my mailing address for tax reasons. No apology. No explanation. Just administration. I learned fast after that. I found a studio apartment above a closed tailor shop on a quiet street. I took extra shifts. I stopped buying anything that wasn't necessary. I kept my head down. My life got smaller, but it also got quieter. Cleaner. Mine. That was the routine I built. Wake up at 6. Coffee. Shower. Work. Come home. Double-check the lock. Heat something simple for dinner. Fall asleep with a podcast playing low enough that it felt like someone else was in the room. For a while, that routine saved me. Then little things started shifting. The first was mail. Not mine. A dentist reminder in my mother's name. Then a bank envelope addressed to my father. At first I assumed it was a forwarding mistake. I wrote return to sender and dropped them back in the box downstairs. Then it happened again. And again. Next came a grocery delivery I never ordered. 2 bags. My father's brand of cereal. The exact tea my mother drank every night. The driver showed me the receipt and apologized for the confusion, but the address was mine. My apartment. My name wasn't on it, but the unit number was correct. I called my mother that evening. She laughed softly and said, "That's strange." I asked if they had put my address on anything. "Why would we do that?" she said. My father got on the line for less than 10 seconds. "You're reading too much into small things," he said. "Focus on your work." That should have calmed me down. It didn't. A week later, I got home and found the hallway light outside my apartment already on. My landlord was strict about conserving power. It was never on in daylight. When I stepped closer, I noticed a faint scrape near my lock. Not enough to prove anything. Just a thin silver mark under the keyhole. I sent a photo to the landlord. He replied an hour later, "Probably maintenance, nothing urgent." Probably. Nothing urgent. That phrase stayed with me because everyone kept using a version of it. The landlord. My mother. My father. Even a coworker I mentioned it to over lunch. "Maybe they're just using your address for paperwork," she said. Annoying, but not dangerous. Not dangerous. Maybe. But people only say that when the danger hasn't touched them yet. So I said less after that. I stopped calling. Stopped asking questions that gave other people a chance to smooth things over. I changed how I came home. I checked reflections in shop windows before turning onto my street. I photographed every envelope, every delivery, every mark near the door. I started writing dates down in a notes app with timestamps and screenshots. Nothing dramatic. Nothing paranoid. Just a record. Because by then, I knew one thing for certain. Something was happening. And somebody hoped I would keep dismissing it until it was too late. So I stopped reacting. And I started watching. The first real proof didn't look important. It was a notification from my bank. Not a withdrawal. Not a charge. Just a routine alert about profile activity. The kind most people ignore. I almost did too, until I noticed the timestamp. 3:14 a.m. I was asleep at that time. I knew because I'd started tracking my sleep to stay functional with the extra shifts. I opened the app and checked the activity log. A new device had accessed my account. Not mine. The location tag was vague, just the city. But the device type was listed clearly. It wasn't my phone. It wasn't my laptop. I changed my password immediately. Enabled two-factor authentication. Logged out of all sessions. Then I sat still for a few minutes, thinking. That could have been random. A breach. A guess. Except it wasn't the only thing anymore. I went back through my notes. The mail. The deliveries. The scrape on the lock. The hallway light. Small things, each one easy to dismiss alone. Together, they didn't feel random anymore. They felt coordinated. I didn't call my parents this time. Instead, I checked my email accounts. My primary was clean. My backup, the one I barely used, had a login attempt from an unfamiliar IP address 2 nights earlier. It hadn't gone through, but it was there. I took screenshots of everything. Saved them in a folder. Then I copied that folder to a second drive. Then I uploaded it to a private cloud account under a different email. Not because I was panicking. Because I didn't want to lose anything. The next piece came 3 days later. I was at work when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from an unknown number. No message, just a few seconds of audio. I almost deleted it. But I didn't. I played it back. At first, it was just background noise. Movement. Fabric shifting. Then voices. Faint, but clear enough if you listened closely. My mother. He's still there, she said. A pause. My father responded, lower, irritated. It doesn't matter. As long as the address is active. Then a sound like something being placed on a table. My mother again. We should have handled this before he left. You're overthinking it, my father said. He doesn't know anything. The voicemail cut off there. I didn't replay it right away. I just sat at my desk, looking at my screen, letting the words settle. As long as the address is active. That wasn't a mistake. That wasn't mail forwarding. That was intentional. They were using my address. But for what? I checked the number that had called. It wasn't saved, but the area code was familiar. Close to where they lived. I didn't call it back. Instead, I pulled the call log and exported it. Added it to the folder. Then I transcribed the voicemail word for word, timestamped it, and saved that too. That's when I started checking official records. Not deep. Just basic things anyone could access. Property listings. Business registrations. Public filings. It didn't take long. There it was. A small business entity registered 2 months earlier. My father's name listed as director. My mother as co-applicant. The registered address. My apartment. Unit number included. I stared at the screen for a long time. That explained the mail. The deliveries. The access attempts. They weren't just using my address casually. They had built something around it. And they hadn't told me. I dug a little further. There were financial filings linked to that entity. Nothing detailed, but enough to show activity. Incoming transfers. Outgoing payments. Not large amounts individually, but frequent. Structured. Careful. The kind of pattern that avoids attention. Unless someone is already looking. I downloaded everything I could legally access. Saved it. Labeled it. Backed it up twice. Then I sat back and looked at the full picture. They had removed me from their home. Cut me off. Then quietly attached my name and address to something they were running without telling me. And they assumed I would never notice. Or if I did, I would ask questions. And they would have time to answer them. Smooth things over. Minimize it. Like they always did. But the voicemail changed that. Because now I knew something else. They weren't just using my address. They were aware of me, monitoring me, talking about me, and they believed I didn't know anything. I didn't feel angry. Not yet. Just clear. Because the moment you confront people like that too early, they adjust. They close gaps. They erase things you haven't even found yet. And I wasn't finished finding things. Confronting them would have ruined everything. Once I understood what they were doing, I stopped thinking like a son. I started thinking like a record keeper. Everything became about timing, copies, and distance. I didn't touch anything they had set up. I didn't try to remove my address from the business listing. I didn't call the bank. I didn't alert anyone. Because the moment something changes too early, people get careful. And I needed them to stay comfortable. I built a second layer around everything I already had. Every document I downloaded was duplicated. One copy stayed on my laptop. One went to an encrypted drive. Another was uploaded to a separate account that had no connection to my name. Then I created something else. A timeline. Dates. Times. Actions. Small notes. No opinions. No assumptions. Just what happened, when it happened, and what evidence supported it. Mail deliveries with photos. Bank alerts with screenshots. The voicemail with a full transcript and audio file. The business registration with timestamps. It started to look less like a collection of odd events and more like a pattern. A clean, structured pattern. The kind that makes sense to someone who doesn't know me. The kind that doesn't rely on me explaining anything. That mattered. Because if this ever left my hands, I didn't want it to sound emotional. I wanted it to sound obvious. A week later, I took the next step. I contacted a lawyer. Not through a recommendation. Not through anyone who knew my family. I searched quietly, read reviews, checked specialties, and chose someone who dealt with financial misuse and identity liability cases. When we met, I didn't tell a story. I handed over the folder. He went through it slowly. No interruptions. Just occasional notes. When he finished, he leaned back and asked one question. Do they know you've seen this? No, I said. He nodded once. Good, he replied. Then he explained it in simple terms. If a business is registered under my residential address without consent, and financial activity is tied to it, there are multiple risks. Legal liability. Tax exposure. Fraud implications depending on intent. But the strongest part, he said, tapping the printed voicemail transcript, is this. Not because it was dramatic. Because it showed awareness. They knew what they were doing. They knew I existed in the middle of it. And they chose not to inform me. That changed everything. We didn't file anything that day. Instead, he suggested something else. Let them continue, he said. People who think they're unnoticed make mistakes. So that's what I did. I went back to my routine. Work. Home. Coffee. Silence. When more mail arrived, I photographed it before returning it. When another small delivery showed up, I accepted it, documented it, and stored the receipt. I didn't interfere. I didn't react. And slowly, the pattern expanded. More transactions appeared in public filings. A secondary account linked to the same business surfaced in a routine search. Then something else. A notice. Official looking. Thin envelope. Government header. Addressed to the business. At my apartment. I didn't open it. I photographed the front. Logged the date. Then I took it directly to the lawyer. He read it carefully. Then he looked up at me. This accelerates things, he said. It wasn't a warning. It was confirmation. Whatever they were doing had crossed a line where someone else had started noticing. And once institutions start noticing, timelines shrink. That was the moment we set everything in motion. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just paperwork. Filings submitted quietly. Notifications scheduled. Authorities looped in through proper channels. Every step documented. Every step timed. And still, I said nothing to them. because from their side, everything looked normal. The address still worked. The mail still arrived. The silence still held. They believed they had control. They believed I was still the same person who left with 2 bags and no options. They believed I would either never notice or never act. The knocking on my door that morning told me something had changed. Because people like that only show up in person when something stops working the way they expect. I stood there, on the inside of the door, listening to them shift their weight in the hallway. Waiting. Uncertain for the first time. And for a moment, I almost opened it. Almost asked questions. Almost gave them a chance to explain. But I didn't. Because by then, everything was already moving. Papers filed. Records flagged. Processes started that couldn't be undone by a conversation at the door. I stepped back instead. Let the silence stay between us. And checked the time. Because I knew exactly what was scheduled to happen next. They thought it was just another day. It wasn't. I didn't open the door. Not immediately. I waited. Not to make a point. Not to punish them. Just to let the timing line up with everything else that had already been set in motion. Another knock came. Shorter this time. Less confident. My father's voice followed, low and controlled. "We know you're inside." I didn't respond. A few seconds passed. Then my mother, softer. "We just need to talk." Need. That word felt different now. I walked back to the kitchen, set the mug down, and checked my phone. A message from the lawyer. "They've been notified. It should be happening shortly." I read it once. Then locked the screen. When I returned to the door, I opened it just enough to see them clearly. They looked smaller. Not physically. Just in the way people do when something isn't going according to their plan. My father tried to smile. It didn't hold. "There's been a mistake," he said quickly. "We've been getting calls. Letters. Something about an investigation." I said nothing. My mother stepped forward half a pace. "They're saying our business is registered here. That can't be right. We would never." I tilted my head slightly. Not accusing. Just listening. She stopped mid-sentence. Because for the first time, she wasn't sure what I knew. My father tried again. "We need to clear this up. You just have to confirm." A car door closed downstairs. Not loud, but sharp enough to cut through the hallway. Then footsteps. Measured. Direct. My parents turned instinctively toward the stairwell. 2 people came into view. Not rushed. Not aggressive. Just certain. One of them spoke first. Calm. Professional. "Mr. and Mrs. Khan?" My father straightened. "Yes. We need to ask you a few questions regarding a registered entity tied to this address." Silence filled the space between all of us. My mother looked at me then. Really looked. Not as someone to guide or correct, but as someone she no longer understood. "This is your doing?" she asked quietly. I didn't answer. Because I didn't need to. The second person stepped slightly closer. "We have documentation indicating this address was used without proper authorization. We also have records of financial activity linked to that registration." My father's tone shifted. Still controlled, but tighter. "There's been a misunderstanding. We can explain." "You'll have that opportunity," the first person said. "But not here." There was no shouting. No scene. Just a steady shift of control from them to something larger than them. My mother's hand moved toward her bag, then stopped. Like she wasn't sure what she was reaching for. My father glanced at me one more time. Not angry. Not even surprised. Just calculating. Like he was still trying to find a version of this where he could adjust the outcome. There wasn't one. They were asked to come with them. They did. Quietly. No resistance. Because resistance only makes things worse when everything is already documented. The hallway emptied slowly after that. Footsteps fading. Voices lowering. Then nothing. I closed the door. Locked it. And for the first time since they showed up, I let myself sit down. Not from relief. Just stillness. My phone buzzed again. Another message. It's done. You're clear. We'll handle the rest. I read it, then placed the phone face down on the table. The apartment felt the same as it always had. Small. Quiet. Untouched. I walked over to the window and looked out at the street below. The rain had stopped. The pavement still held the shine of it, reflecting light in soft patches. Nothing about the outside world marked what had just happened. No one stopped. No one stared. It wasn't dramatic. It was just over. I made another cup of coffee, sat at the table, and let the silence settle back into place. No calls came after that. No messages. No explanations. Just distance. The kind that doesn't need to be maintained because it builds itself. I didn't feel like I had won anything. There was no sense of victory. Just a quiet understanding. They had tried to use something that belonged to me without asking. And in the process, they placed themselves in a position they couldn't control. All I did was step back and let the structure around it do what it was designed to do. That night, everything was quiet.